It's here. The time is now. We're with Melissa Loble, Carrie, Gardner, Lindsey, and I should know if it's Hallett or Hallett. I think it's Hallett.
Hallett.
Shoot.
You were so close. So close.
0 for 1.
Mark, you should have asked.
0 for 1. Sounds like my math grade. Let's get going today because we are talking with some just expert educators. You know Melissa. Melissa is our Chief Customer Experience Officer over here at Instructure and Canvas. Carrie and Lindsey are just fantastic. They're based out in Blue Valley, out in Missouri.
Kansas.
Not Missouri.
Right on the line.
0 for 2, Mark. 0 for 2.
0 for 2. This is a bad day, everybody.
Turnover.
But let's pause. Cut. We're live, everybody. And I happen to have some good friends. If you're not a part of the Canvas for Elementary Teachers Facebook group, there are now 116,000 strong of you, and it's become awesome and crazy. These are the two fantastic educators, Carrie and Lindsey, that started that whole craze. So thank you. Sorry, whatever it is we say to you, you're welcome. I don't know what we say. So with that, we're going to just talk today about keeping it simple. We've seen some pretty incredible examples over the past little bit from educators who are just doing great things, and congratulations, especially during this time that is really, really difficult. But we think it's probably important for us to kind of recenter a little bit and make sure we're focusing on the stuff that's most important, and not overstress ourselves with stuff that maybe we don't need to worry about. So with that, Melissa, I'm handing it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And Carrie and Lindsey, thank you so much for participating today, and more importantly, really facilitating a pretty incredible community of teachers coming together to really just at the end of the day make a difference in the experience that they're providing students. So cool. Thank you. I'm honored and humbled to have you with us today. So speaking of keeping it simple, right? Part of that is, how do you manage being overwhelmed, especially at the beginning of a semester, and especially one that we're having this year, where so much is unexpected and so much is needing to be prepared, and so much is needing to be different than it's been in the past. So what's some advice, or as you've worked with various teachers, as you've helped folks, and even in your own teaching, what are some things that you could share to help manage that feeling of being overwhelmed at this beginning of a term?
Sure. Lindsey, do you want to go? You want me?
Well, I immediately thought when you asked that question, the start of the school year kind of feels like the start of the new year, where I'm going to have all of these amazing resolutions. I'm going to eat healthy, go to bed early, exercise, read all the books. And by January 2nd, I've been overwhelmed and I failed, or I've dropped the ball somewhere. And I feel like at the beginning of the year, educators feel that same way. I have all these grand goals. I have all these ideas, and I want to do all the things because I know it's what's best for kids. And then we quickly realize I can't maintain this, or I can't do it all right now. So what's one thing that I can start that I can maintain? And maybe that's a discussion in Canvas, where for a couple of weeks, we're just going to practice discussions instead of discussions and cloud assignments and all the things, because that only overwhelms me as a teacher, but it overwhelms my students trying to learn all of the things, but also overwhelms the families. So starting small, and as hard as that is for us, educators, everyone, it really does have that lasting impression of, okay, baby steps, and that scaffolding really allows for better success down the road.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that. Just that one thing. Like I think, I don't know, I follow a whole bunch of different inspirational people on Instagram. And I know one of them said, like, just focus on one goal at a time. And I think, to speak to Lindsey's point, like thinking about what is one thing you could feel comfortable with in Canvas and get your kids to feel comfortable with as well. And then bring on, and that's like the best part about Canvas is it has, I call it like the Cadillac, right? It is like, it's got everything. It's got the leather heated seats and the air conditioned cooled seats. Like, it's got it all. But right now, we just need it to like drive. It can be a beater right now. It doesn't need to be a Cadillac. And so, thinking about what is that one thing you can do. And like Lindsey mentioned, like, just if you're comfortable using discussions, use discussions. I think for like assignments, I obviously love cloud assignments. I love the new Google LTI that's kind of brand new and shiny. But But like a text entry assignment is super simple. A kid can literally type in their response. It doesn't have to be in a Google Doc. It can be right there within Canvas. They can submit it back to you. I can see it in SpeedGrader. I can give them some really nice feedback. Maybe it's even just a letter to the teacher and they type me just a note and then I can give them feedback and they can get used to going into Canvas, submitting something and then seeing that feedback. And so I think, there's so many times where we want to use all those bells and whistles and have it just like hum. And right now, just get one thing in there and really have your kids practice that. And even if it's just like having them do that every day, having them do that, twice a day, practicing that skill until they're really good at it and then feel confident and then being able to add on to that.
Yeah, I'm curious, Carrie, thinking about that, in the teaching that I've done in the past, I often will bring my students along for the ride. So I'll let them know that one thing. Hey, this is the one thing I'm doing right now, and this is why. Do you encourage that? Have you done that? Have you seen teachers do that? Or you're just really transparent with your students around, hey, we're learning this together. This is why we're doing it. It's not, sometimes that can help with anxiety or even just allow for more freedom and creativity with students. I don't know, have you looked at that, or do you encourage teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I saw someone post in our group and I thought this was like absolutely genius. She had trouble with something and she literally like on the Zoom had her kids help her problem solve it. And I was like, that is genius, because truthfully, like I have a second grader at home and I have a 4-year-old at home. And I think both of them can use technology at about the same pace now. Like they know it better than I do, which is saying a lot. And I just thought that was so genius to have her kids actually help her problem solve something. And again, I think like what you're saying, bring them along for that ride. Like this is the one thing we're going to focus on this week. And even thinking about the virtual students at home, after you master this, I want you to show your parent that you can do this, and then bring them along for the ride too. And then they start to, feel like, okay, my kids got this. They're showing me how to do it. I know that they're going to be okay in this virtual world.
I love that. I love that parent involvement to that piece, which is so new, I think, because parent involvement has dramatically changed in a virtual teaching world. So I'm curious, Lindsey, in thinking about that overwhelmed question, and helping people not feel overwhelmed, how do you help parents not feel overwhelmed? Or are there things that you're doing or seeing other teachers do to manage that new part of the relationship that's happening in this virtual world?
That is such a good question. And I've seen some of our virtual teachers struggle with that. How do I keep parents and families and guardians and the grown-ups in the space, involved, not over-involved, but still aware of what we're expecting their children to do in a new platform with a different teacher all at the same time? And so some of the things we've leveraged is being able to send an announcement with the day overview or perhaps the week overview. So they can sit down with their child to say, hey, this is what's coming up this week. This is what some of the assignments are going to look like. This is what your teacher says you're going to focus on. And that allows the parent to be in the know, the child to be in the know, but gives them that time to ask questions before they get into the meat of the week or the lesson to say, I know we're going to need help with this. What advice do you have to help us problem solve with this new tool or this new strategy we're trying? So I think really that overview, a quick, some teachers are creating a little quick video like, okay, we're using a discussion for the first time. Here's what it's going to look like on your end. Here's where you're going to click, showing them that step by step. And I even saw this on Twitter where a teacher said, it takes me 5 minutes to make that video, but it's helping all the students, all the families, and it's really saving me time in the long run than having to answer those one-by-one emails because they know what's expected from either the announcement or that quick little video on the page to help them feel comfortable with accessing everything.
And I want to just highlight something Lindsey said, on this platform, I have to highlight it. She said they're grown up. And I think right now, like something that we, kind of forget is that students may be at home with maybe not a family member. And, to say parents or to say your mom or your dad, I saw something, I think Lindsey sent it to me, and it was like, tell your grown up, whoever your grown up is. And I thought that was just such a nice way to be inclusive of all students and where they may be at in their learning right now. And they may not be at home. They may be, maybe even at mom or dad's work, or their grown-ups work in a side corner. And so I just loved that she used that grown-up and having that be the term you use instead of referring to a parent, and that may then make that student feel like, well, I don't have a parent here. So I just had to highlight that on this platform.
I love that. And that inclusive, that focus on inclusivity, that's a new thing, I think, for us too. It's not that we haven't cared about that in the past. It's just different, right? In a virtual environment. They're in a new environment physically. They're in a new environment from a support perspective. The resources are different. And I think that's such an important thing to highlight. I love that. I'm curious, as you're thinking about tips and tricks and places to start, and as you're facilitating a community to do that, we had a question actually from Christy, or more of an observation that I'd like to turn into a question. And what's the easiest and best way that you've seen or that you've done to collect work, grade that work, and give feedback so that students can quickly see that and be able to grow from that feedback? And I know one of them, the cloud assignments. I love cloud assignments, but I can also use just a text entry. That's a good example. Are there some other examples of just collecting work, grading, and giving feedback in meaningful ways using Canvas?
Sure. I'll take this one. Lindsey, you can then hang on with me. I love going back to like super basics. Like, I think kids should write on a piece of paper. I think that they should show their math work on a piece of paper. I think that my son at home should write out his writing assignments. I think typing is obviously a skill that he's going to need and going to be a necessity. But I also don't want to forget about the things that, really allow students to engage in their work in a normal classroom setting. And so I think even just using paper pencil, and then, if your student's on an iPad, take a picture of it and submit it. The Canvas app makes that super easy. If you're on a Chromebook, they have cameras too. Take a picture of it, submit it as a file. I think that sometimes we think that the virtual world has to be so digital. And I think taking it back to what would I have my student do in my classroom? If I would have them write that down, or if I would have them draw me a picture, do that anyway, and then have them submit it as a file or an image, and just taking it kind of back to those basics.
I love that. And that's, once again, something very simple and straightforward that a teacher can quickly do as they're teaching themselves how to use Canvas and how to teach in this fully virtual world. Lindsey, any tips or tricks you have around doing this?
I think going back to the basics is so important. And one thing we talked about in the spring during our continuous learning phase was we were providing those online lessons and practice problems, but really, how do we also provide those offline experiences? So an example in the fourth grade lesson plans was we're talking all about erosion. And so it was, okay, here's the quick lesson. We're going to read some text, but now your task is when you go on a walk or go out in your backyard, I want you to look for examples of X, Y, Z. And I'm not even going to have you submit it in a discussion, although that would be awesome, or add it to a Padlet. But hey, next morning meeting tomorrow, let's just share out what we saw and learned. And so that's a quick formative assessment to see, okay, what were they seeing? Did they see anything? And maybe they didn't have the opportunity, and that's okay, but they still have that online experience, that offline experience. And then we were able to circle back around and have that discussion. So I think that's another way to kind of balance it all, but not have it all be digital and not have it all be in Canvas and, more clicks. But that's another way to streamline things too, thinking of the balance of digital or online versus offline.
Absolutely.
And I do want to tag that piece about the feedback. Canvas, I think, does make it really easy for our students to see that feedback. They can click on that grades, see their assignments, see what feedback their teachers have given them. They just may not know exactly where to find it. And so I could see that being a really great moment in a Zoom session with your students. Okay, guys, I want you to go ahead and go into Canvas. Let's find that feedback, and make sure you have something in there that they can actually look at, and make sure your students and their grown-ups know where to find that information. Obviously, it normally shows up also on the recent feedback on the right-hand side of the screen, but just making sure everyone knows where to get that and being on the same page so that they can see that feedback that you've provided.
That's a great point. And I think that's not taking for granted what students might be able to understand within Canvas and what they may not be able to understand. And then that's also you can turn that into a lesson in and of itself. I can already picture that, which is incredible. Also highlighting on the feedback and the grading piece of it, we had a question from Kimberly. We're asking, how are you actually grading those assignments that are turned in as an image? So I think there's some probably like, what do you love about SpeedGrader in that question, because it can really help do that. So thoughts about how you're actually doing the grading and how you're leveraging even SpeedGrader to do that.
Sure.
Are you up or me?
Lindsey, you go.
In our district, we really leverage those rubrics that allow us, and we use standards-based grading. So we attach those rubrics to the assignments that we're collecting as pieces of evidence. And so it also kind of goes back to everything that we're asking students to do does not need to be assigned or have a grade attached to it. So we can still provide that ongoing feedback, but it may not pass back to the grade book. It could be that quick formative assessment piece to help me really plan my next lesson. So kind of that exit ticket portion, but also that part that goes back to the grade book. So what is practice and what is really that collection of evidence of learning? And we really leverage those rubrics that make it really easy in SpeedGrader, again, to click on the numbers and then even give that voice or video feedback as well.
That's great. That's great. In thinking about feedback outside of SpeedGrader or grading outside of SpeedGrader, and I'm going to say grading loosely because I think that's so important in thinking about what's formative versus what's either summative or official grading, right?
Right.
How do you use collaborative tools, discussions, maybe Google Docs through cloud assignments? How do you use collaborative tools to get students to engage in one another? And what happens, I mean, we face this in classrooms every day, right? Some students are shy, some students aren't. Do you have tips, tricks for simple ways to get all students to engage in those things that might not be formal assessment moments, but are opportunities to give feedback and to also assess your own journey that you've crafted for your students?
Sure. And that's where I feel like discussions, like, they really are such a powerful tool. Because I feel like it is those shy kids, those kids that maybe wouldn't have spoke out in class. All of a sudden you're like, you had those thoughts in your head all along and I had no idea. And it's so cool to like see them kind of come alive in a digital platform. And I think what's nice is you can make a discussion graded, or you can even just make it complete, incomplete. And I hate to go back to SpeedGrader again, but what's so cool about that is within SpeedGrader, I can just see what that student posted. I can even see their replies, and then I can see the whole thing if I want to. But it allows me to narrow it down and see what those students specifically said. And again, I think it's because it uses the rich content editor, if that is one tool I feel like get your kids familiar with using, it is everywhere in Canvas. And through that rich content editor, they can add text, they can add images, and maybe it is just an image within that discussion or even a video that they post and then have to watch and reply. And this is probably stealing a page out of Lindsey's book, but Lindsey always recommends putting like prompts for students. And so, having that, I want you to start your sentence with this. I want you to then reply with one of these sentence starters. And kids, I mean, they're adaptable, obviously, but they may not be used to, when we're talking about kindergartens, first grade, second grade, they may not be used to an online discussion. And so just getting them in the habit of giving them something to start with. And then as they get more comfortable, you can take that kind of away, and then they're used to that online platform, but you've provided that scaffolding to get them used to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lindsey, any tricks for getting students to engage in some of that maybe non-traditional assignment-generated activities?
Well, Carrie stole mine, if that's not fair. I don't know what it is. But one of the things that we actually are going to discuss in our Canvas Con presentation is not only that discussion, and Carrie mentioned, responding and replying, but using that time to really teach how do we give kind, specific, and helpful feedback. Not only how do we give it, but how do we receive it? And then how do we use that feedback to enhance our learning even more? So again, with that rich content, or being able to share my learning in multiple ways, but also take that learning from others and enhance my own learning, I think is the best way.
What a powerful piece of advice too, because if you think about the world of work. And even though we may be preparing very young children for years way ahead, that's such an important skill, and it's becoming so much more important in an asynchronous fashion. We can't always rely on the physical setting to drive, how do I take feedback, what is that feedback, and then what do I do with that? We have to teach kids to be able to do that in an asynchronous or digital or virtual setting. And what a great way to take both a lesson and have students work on the content and also have them understand a really important skill for success as they continue their learning journey and then on into the workplace. I love that. I think also if we pull that back into this keeping it simple, I know teachers can often feel overwhelmed when they either use discussions or other tools and they get students talking a ton. And like, oh my gosh, how do I not spend the next 7 hours just responding to all of these discussions? Do either of you have any suggestions for not also being overwhelmed by a really engaged class, which is what we all want, but right. I've even had this where I've taught and I go into my class and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a lot to dig into. I've got to grade, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and I want to acknowledge this, but I also, I have to manage my time so I can do the other things I'm trying to do. Any strategies or suggestions for teachers feeling overwhelmed by over participation and how they can balance that?
I don't know if I have anything brilliant off the top of my head, but one of the things is allowing students to self-assess themselves. Like, okay, all week I've been practicing on main idea, and this is that one piece of evidence I am choosing to submit to my teacher that I feel really proud of, that maybe it's not being collected as a grade, but that I really want feedback on. So we already talked a little bit about feedback, but I think the next step is really teaching our students how to advocate for themselves and ask for that feedback and ask to have that reflection process done with them. Okay, here's how I'm doing with this standard or this lesson. What do you think? But then also, how do I then assess the child with what they choose to submit? Mm-hmm. So we can practice all week long, but what is the piece that they feel most confident or most proud of that then we can really have that reflection piece with?
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And like Lindsey said, like not everything has to go to the grade book. And maybe some of it really is just a piece to accountability piece. It's just like, let's make sure that they know how to do it. They know how to post a discussion. They know how to upload a file. And it's like a quick check for you. I mean, that incomplete option where I can just drop down, mark it done, and move on to the next one where they at least know I've acknowledged I've seen it, but it's not something that is going to be impacting their grade going forward. It more is information for me. I know they know how to do it. I can do a quick look and see if they understand, but then it's just kind of moving on through.
I love that. Not everything needs in-depth grading or feedback, right? There's just things that are just about the participation and the quick understanding of that your students are progressing. One of the tricks that I've done in the past too is I've had students group was responsible for the discussion, and in those discussion forums, then they have to facilitate that discussion. And this probably doesn't work with some of the really, really, really young grades, but you can pull this off in like 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, where now they're also learning how do you sustain a conversation or how do you direct that in trying to unpack whatever that topic. Now, certain topics work, certain don't, but that's one of the tricks that I've also seen kind of get your students to help you. I don't want to say teach the class, but facilitate the class and be engaged in that way.
I love that. And kids want to, like, think about, I was this kid, right? I was a kid. I was like, good job, teacher. Clearly, I've been a teacher. Some of those, like, give those kids that, like, really want to do something that you normally would have given a job in the classroom, whether it was, like, take this to the office to get you out of my hair for 10 minutes so you stop asking me for help. Or it's, like those same kids still want to feel that ownership in the classroom, even if it's a virtual classroom. So I think that's a great idea, Melissa.
Yeah. So any other thoughts around this keeping it simple theme, or how are we seeing maybe even not just teachers but schools sort of distract from that keeping it simple, and how do we get them back on track? I loved the focus on the one point and be deliberate in your choices of how you are rolling things out and engage students in all of that. Are there any other suggestions, advice that you have, especially for those teachers and maybe even teams or schools that are not going down that. It becomes less effective for the students. Any other advice, suggestions?
Yeah, I think the thing that we have seen recently that some of our teachers have started adding to their homepage, which I think has been a bit of a game changer for them, is that weekly schedule. And it's easy just to pop it into a table. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Here are the things you're going to do. And even if you have that in a module, just having it outlined there for the kids to see and know exactly what's expected of them. And again, thinking about those grownups at home that might be helping them. When they see that too, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I know exactly what we're doing for the day. We got this, And I think, Canvas obviously makes it so easy when putting things in modules for students to be able to work through that content, but having it outlined and right on the homepage, like just dropping it right in there. And what's nice is you could go ahead and use that same template each week, and you're just filling in what needs to be in there. And so then you kind of get a rhythm to it for yourself as well. And even if it's like, okay, each day we're going to do A, B, C, and D. And you know what? We're going to repeat that each week. And then maybe the following week, I'm going to take out C and add in something else. But it just allows the teacher to even kind of wrap their brain around a format that will sort of work for them.
You're almost exposing the organization of your course, which is really interesting because if you think about it, we don't often share our lesson plans with students as lesson plans. But there's a little bit of that there, which once again helps them understand in a very transparent way. How am I a learner? How do I learn? How does this align to the way people may teach me? And I love that it accomplishes that while at the same time it really does keep it simple and keep you focused. Lindsey, any suggestions or advice from you?
We've also seen not only take the week overview on the homepage, but even a daily overview. So, it's from 8:45 to 9:15. Here's what you're going to click and here's what you're going to do. So they see that day's view as well and know what to expect and know where to click and how to access all of the information. And sometimes it's, you're leaving Canvas to go do something, but then I go right back to this homepage and I see what that next little bit of time is asking me to do. So that week overview is really helpful, but sometimes it's even that day overview. And all of those things could obviously be put in a module, but it just sometimes for right now as we're learning that day overview, that schedule, it's like, okay, check, what's next, check. It's helpful for the teacher and also the grownups, the students as well. We a lot of our teachers have, created buttons that go to days of the week or months, and that's amazing. But then we've kind of scaled back and said, okay, for right now, I'm going to get back to that at some point. For right now, this day or week overview is super helpful. And it may not be the prettiest right now, but that's okay because that's what's getting the students to the information and to the pages and the assignments. So that's that scaled back version. It may not be as beautiful and vibrant as what they may want to use down the road, but it kind of helps take it back to, okay, this has gotten me 3 clicks into this instead of 7. And that's already a big win. So rather than 7 clicks, they now can get there in 2 to 3 clicks. And that's exactly what we want.
Yeah, and that leads me to one of my last questions. I think one thing that can overwhelm teachers is this desire to have a beautiful looking course and not only use all the functions, but make it cool. And you mentioned buttons, and you're just getting so creative, and you're trying to make this so engaging that it can be complicated or harder to find things, or even not. I hate to say this. Sometimes it's not even worth the effort for the students because they don't notice some of that. So how do you both in your own classes or working with other teachers? How do you sort of balance between beauty is great, but there's some importance to functionality, right? And just making it simple and keeping it clean so that students can do what they do. So how do you sort of coach people to balance that? How do you balance that in your own teaching?
What's really funny is my niece, she probably would be so mad if I was telling this story, but she's in Iowa and she is in high school and they're using Canvas for the first time. They're coming from another platform and they're now in Canvas. And I was like, I use Canvas every day. Like, let's talk about it. She's like, oh my gosh. And I said, okay, flip the camera. I've got to see your courses. Show me everything. And she's just like me, where she wants everything to be beautiful and perfect. But that's exactly what was distracting her as the learner in all of her various courses. She's like, I don't need the Bitmoji. I don't need all these buttons. Just tell me where I need to click so I can click it. And another important thing she said was, I would love it to be consistent, teacher to teacher, and maybe not the same header or buttons or the same colors, but where do I click each day to get that information? And I thought that was so powerful, especially coming from her, knowing her so well, where I would think as a learner, she would want it to be beautiful because she's always helped me with my own bulletin boards, but it was really the opposite of what she was wanting to see in her teachers' courses. So that was really helpful for me to take back to our teachers we're working with, to go back to the basics, to streamline it and pick one thing to make beautiful.
Yeah, it's so interesting about that. And I teach in a program, and I have when I used to teach high school, and my fellow teachers, it was always this competition of, and for some of, oh, look what I did. Oh, look what I did. And when students would come and they would say, hey, this teacher does this or this teacher does that, it was never about the visual, right? It was never about how beautiful it was. It was like, hey, did you know this other teacher gives feedback in speed grader? It would be that conversation, right?
Yes.
It isn't, did you know they have 7 buttons with these cool flowers on them? And that, it's so interesting where you'd see that disparity and what students would point out. It was always did you know I only have to click one click to get to the daily schedule?
Yes.
And that stuff they come to the other teachers with.
And one thing her teachers did, and she has amazing teachers, and I know this because of what they did, they sent out a feedback survey after a few weeks and said, hey, what's working well in Canvas? What's not? What would make it easier for you? What can I change? What can I do better? And I thought that was so powerful because we want their feedback. We want this to be successful for them. So they were able to get that feedback from students and then make those changes. And that's exactly what we want our students to be able to do, is take feedback and make those changes. So I thought that was so powerful as the teacher, but a great experience for the students to give that feedback as well.
Oh, yeah.
Well, to have that ownership in it, like, oh, I'm going to give my teacher feedback and potentially see my ideas then implemented in the course. And it's funny, like thinking about changes. Like when we first started this group, back in May, I came into it thinking like I was going to, start this group and it was going to be all people who'd used Canvas before, and I was going to steal their ideas, and it was going to be this grand world. And then it quickly became, there's this whole slew of schools that have come onto Canvas, and there's all these brand new teachers. And all of a sudden I'm an expert when I thought I was going to go into a group and start it and get all these experts that I could kind of mooch off of. And it's just funny because it really shifted. And some of the things that we shared back in May, I think, gosh, I know better now. And I would totally do that completely differently. And we have the now kind of newer stuff. It's a shift in that. And I think one of the pieces is really only having like a get started button on the homepage. So kids, when they come to that homepage, it's like, get started. I know exactly what button to click. And then that either takes them into that weekly overview or a daily overview. And even though it's a little more linked to the teacher, like of where that get started button goes, I think, if it's a weekly overview, then that's once a week. That's what you do on Fridays on your way out. You relink that button, and then students know exactly where to click when they come into your course on Monday morning.
Yep.
So
I love that. And one of the things I love about both of you is that you are so willing to take risks and try things. I think about the teachers, all these teachers, especially the new ones using Canvas, and their desire to do that. I hope that their districts and their department chairs and their schools as a whole give them the space to be able to take these risks, because as we've talked about earlier, not only do they allow all of us to iterate on our practice, which is so awesome. This is how we're going to see great change in the way we deliver education, is giving people the place to iterate. But it also, back to your point, it exposes that to students. And there's so much they can learn in watching that. And there's so much feedback and acknowledgement they can get as being part of that. And I think that's really powerful too, as we think about how we shape them and how they go off onto their journeys. So I just hope, and if there's administrators out there listening to this, parents out there listening to this, please, support and allow your teachers to take risks and try new things and bring their students along on that ride, because that's how we're going to see just really incredible change. And that's how we're going to see all these benefits from virtual that you may not have been able to get in a traditional physical classroom every single day in the way it was shaped. So I just had to thank you for taking these risks and encouraging this and giving people a safe place to experiment. And like I said, I hope we can continue to allow teachers to do that. Mark, am I missing any questions?
You know, we have proven very successfully that these go way better when I don't talk. And so I think that we're going to take that student-teacher relationship to another level. And I'm going to not talk anymore on these because that was just absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Tomorrow morning, for those of you who are not signed up for CanvasCon, it's October 15th. I actually did get a note from this little weasel, Marcus Painter, just wanting to know when Melissa was going to be on more often because he likes hearing her voice more than mine. So thanks, Marcus. Thank you for nothing.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you for nothing. Sign up for CanvasCon. You will see Melissa giving a keynote. You'll see Carrie and Lindsey speaking there as well. October 15th, super awesome. Tomorrow morning session, 8:30 a.m. Mountain. It's a change in time. We're with our good friend Lauren Burleson, the Canvas Queen down in Clark County, who's going to be talking all about creating templates. So with that, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Melissa. Have a lovely day, everybody.
Thanks for having us.